and welcome back to MS Workout's YouTube channel. I'm Jen, and I'll be your host today. Normally, we post an exercise video every week on this channel, but today we're doing something different because we have a very special guest. Dr. Ilana Katz Sand is a renowned neurologist at the forefront of the battle against MS. She is the Associate Director of the Corinne Dickinson Goldsmith Center for MS at Mount Sinai and recently hosted a presentation at our weekly Q&A with our members of the MS Workouts membership program. In this video, you're going to learn the latest research behind some of the most popular diets that people living with MS have tried. From the modified Paleolithic diet, to the Swank Diet, to a Mediterranean diet, she showcases the latest studies and breaks down what the science has to say about each. Okay, everyone, enjoy the presentation by Dr. Ilana Katz.
So I'll start by talking about some of the different dietary patterns that people tend to be interested in that are currently being studied in the MS research world. We'll talk about the evidence that we have for different patterns in terms of symptom management and also in terms of their impact as a disease modifier. So kind of differentiating those two. And then, as we mentioned, Jess will go into kind of the practical applications. What I'm not going to talk about in terms of the research is individual dietary components, like is it okay if I eat this or is it okay if I eat that? Because Jess will emphasize this point also, we really feel that the overall pattern is what's most important. And we don't have tons and tons of time today, but I will tell you that the research for individual components is really, it's difficult to do, and it's really even less strong than what we have for patterns. So that's why we've chosen to focus on the patterns today. Okay. So here's a list of some of the patterns that come up really commonly that people ask about in my practice and that are being studied for research. And we'll go through each of these and the research done on them, one at a time. So first is the Swank diet, which is, I'm sure, one that a lot of people have heard of. So Roy Swank was really a pioneer. He was a man before his time. He started doing studies in MS and diet well before anyone thought this could really be important. And that was based on some of the ecological studies that he did showing that when people moved, when there were population changes, when there was more industrialization, that the incidence of MS seemed to change. And so based on those observations, he really felt strongly that this was related to introduction of like modern farming practices, so dairy products and meat. And so he felt strongly about the idea of a very low fat diet, particularly a low saturated fat diet. And so what he did was really remarkable.
Hi there, and thank you for joining us for this important conversation. I hope you're enjoying the presentation. Maintaining a proper diet and exercise routine is vital, and that's why our team is so passionate about helping our clients. Since 2017, we have offered an online membership so that our clients can get instant access to the necessary exercises, stretches, and information they need in their fight against MS and similar conditions. From on-demand seated strength training exercise classes and stretch courses to live workouts and Q&A sessions with special guest presenters, our team is ready to assist you in achieving your goals through our easy-to-navigate MS Workout app that you can download to your phone. If you're ready to start exercising with us or you want to learn more, then go to www.msworkouts.com. Again, that's www.msworkouts.com. Our team would love to help you.
He followed people. This paper that I have shown here was the result of following people with MS for 34 years, which is amazing when you think about modern clinical trials and how we follow people for a few weeks or a few months or maybe 2 years, 3 years at best. But it's really amazing work that he did this. The issue is that it, of course, doesn't follow modern clinical trial practices. So what he did was he told everyone, you guys should all follow this diet that I'm recommending. It's low saturated fat, which is less than 20 grams per day. Really limit animal-derived products. And then what he did was he came back later and said, okay, who followed it and who didn't? And he divided people into those that were, quote, good dieters or bad dieters. And the people who were the good dieters did better. The problem with this, of course, is, good habits hang together. And so people who were the good dieters, who, everyone chose this. There was no randomization. or anything like that. And so people who choose to follow this kind of diet are people who also probably exercise and didn't smoke and had other really good health habits. And so it's kind of hard to know exactly the impact of the diet, but nonetheless, I think, very interesting and informative. Here's another one that I think a lot of people will be familiar with, which is the Wahls Diet, or a modified paleo diet. And a paleo diet is one that includes meat, fish, certain vegetables and fruits, and basically eliminates things from modern farming practices. So there's no gluten, no casein, no lectins in this particular diet. And actually, Jess and I just came from a call that was with Terry Wahls as part of our group. So interesting to hear what stuff she's working on now. But in this particular trial, she and her colleagues tried a Swank diet versus a paleo elimination diet. They followed people for 24 weeks, and they really were trying to look at fatigue. So to get into the study, people had to have significant MS-related fatigue. And what they found was that people who followed both types of diets showed an improvement in fatigue at 24 weeks. Both groups showed an improvement in quality of life, although the people who followed the Wahls diet had a higher improvement in quality of life. And then those who followed the Wahls diet walked further in their 6-minute walk test after 24 weeks. So that's what we have for Wahls. We don't really have any information on whether this diet works as a disease modifier, but as we just heard in talking to Dr. Wahls, it sounds like that's something that she and her team are working on now. McDougall diet, this work was done by one of my colleagues in Oregon at OHSU by Dr. Yadav. So this diet is based on the intake of starchy plant-based foods and then some non-starchy vegetables and fruits. It is actually even lower fat intake than Swank. Only 10% of all energy intake is supposed to come from fat. No animal products and no oils at all, including no olive oil allowed in this diet. They did a study that was very small. They randomized 61 people with MS to either follow this diet or not, and then they looked at them a year later, but the study was very underpowered. So as everyone knows, our treatments have become really good at preventing new lesions on MRI. They're not perfect, but they've gotten so much better, thankfully, over the past few years. And therefore, it's going to be really hard if you take a treated population to look at this endpoint. So it's not surprising that they didn't show any differences. But what they did find was that there was a reduction in fatigue, and that seemed to be in part moderated by weight loss. And so what they then did was a follow-up study, which the results are shown here. And it was a small study, but they really just wanted to look at fatigue, and they found a pretty significant difference. So those who followed their McDougall protocol showed a big improvement in fatigue compared to those who did not. Our next pattern is caloric restriction and intermittent fasting. So the idea here is when you restrict calories or when you fast intermittently, the idea is that you can shift your body's metabolism. So normally the body relies quite a lot on glucose, but if you fast, then you're going to shift that pathway towards using fatty acids for energy. And so in animal models, there are very clear benefits of these patterns in terms of the immune system and also in terms of neuroprotection. So protecting myelin and promoting remyelination, which of course is really important. In terms of studies in people, there have been a couple of small studies. So one was an initial study in people with MS showing that this pattern was pretty well tolerated and people lost some weight. They had improvement in emotional well-being. Couldn't really, learn too much else from it because the study was very small and very short. And then another small study with just a few people with MS. But what they did here, which was really interesting, is they showed that after just 12 weeks, there were some regional improvements in brain volumes on MRI. And there were a couple of advanced MRI measures that suggested maybe there's reduced inflammation in their nervous system after only 12 weeks. Very small study, only 5 people, but really, really interesting and moving this kind of work forward. I think this pattern, much like the one I'm going to discuss next for ketogenic diet, the biggest limitation is, how long can people really, do these patterns. They're pretty hard to follow, even for people who are really disciplined, and it can be really unpleasant. It can also be isolating from a social perspective because you're going to be definitely doing something different than the rest of your family. This is not something you're going to have your children do or your partner do, and it becomes really hard to be able to, enjoy meals with family and friends. If you're having a fasting day and your friends want to go out to dinner, it can just be a kind of a difficult thing to do. So I think that's the hard part about this pattern, and also the ketogenic pattern. So a ketogenic diet has a similar idea actually to intermittent fasting and caloric restriction. It utilizes it's really the same mechanism at the end of the day. It's just a different way of getting there. Here it's with production of ketone bodies, but it's the same idea where you're going to use fatty acids as the primary energy source instead of glucose. And again, clear benefits in animal models of MS. Someone else who was on our call today, who was just giving a presentation, Dr. Brenton, who you can see here, talked about their study in ketogenic diet and MS. Their study didn't have a control arm, but they did show that among the people who did do the diet, it was pretty well tolerated. It was only for 6 months, but people, for the most part, could actually do it for 6 months. People lost weight, they had improvements in body composition, and they had improvements in terms of their fatigue, depression, and disability score. Not in that study, but in a different study, there was shown to be a reduction in neurofilament light chain, which is a blood biomarker of neuroinflammation in MS. And so, again, I think pretty interesting stuff. And from a mechanistic standpoint, really interesting. And I think probably these are important pathways and could be really useful. But I think from a practical standpoint, probably really difficult for people to do in the long term. So I'll tell you a little bit now about our group's work, which has focused on Mediterranean patterns. And I'll tell you, first of all, why we've done that. So first of all, the general health benefits of a Mediterranean pattern are really well established. So we have all seen studies that have come out over the years about impact on cardiovascular health, right, on diabetes and high blood pressure, and in preventing heart attacks and stroke. So that's all really helpful, right? People who live with MS, but they also live with all the other things that everyone else lives with. And we want to make sure that we're doing things that are going to promote people's overall health and help them feeling really well. We also know that all of those comorbidities, vascular comorbidities, are also not good for MS prognosis and MS symptoms. And so we think this is a really nice pattern for that. We didn't really talk about components today. As I mentioned, those are a little trickier, and I'm happy to talk about those a little more offline. But the ideas behind the components that we think probably would be helpful, things that are going to reduce neuroinflammation, improve oxidative stress, things that are going to really be neuroprotective, that are going to protect our mitochondria. A lot of those components are really emphasized in Mediterranean patterns, right? So brightly colored vegetables and fruits, whole grains that are high in fiber, olive oil we think is probably very helpful in terms of the healthy fats that it has. All of those things we think are helpful in terms of these mechanisms, and putting them together, we think it's a great looking pattern to start with. The nice thing in terms of our work is that there are indices that you can apply to observational studies. So unlike the other patterns, there are readily available questionnaires that we can ask people to complete that show us how well people's diets align with a Mediterranean pattern. We can then apply those to our research cohorts, and we can look to see if there are any associations with MS-related disability or MRI metrics, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But really importantly, we think that it's really reasonable to aim for long-term adherence. So the concept that this is really a lifestyle change, and it's not just a diet that you do for a few months, but this is something that we think people can do kind of forever. It's something that the entire household can get on board with, right? Partners, children, like this is healthy for everyone. And it's really budget friendly when you do it the right way. It doesn't have to be something that's, only for people who have tons of money. This is something that anyone really can do. So in our pilot study, we randomly assigned 36 women with MS to either follow or not follow our Mediterranean intervention. So they either did that or they just continued their usual habits. Our participants lost a small amount of weight, about 1 pound per month, which was great because we didn't really counsel them on weight loss. So it was really just because they changed their diet to things that were a little bit healthier. what we found is that we weren't actually powered for this, but we had a really nice effects on the impact of people's MS symptoms on their daily life by one of our questionnaires, a positive impact on fatigue, and actually an improvement or stabilization or improvement in people's disability scores. And we did have a control group in this study.
And Dr. Katz, Felipe here. Just wanted to let you know that the presentation's going awesome and the slides are working well. I know sometimes when we're presenting, it can you don't see everyone on the room. So I just want to give you that reminder. We're good here. Yeah, of course.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned, it's possible for us to apply a scale by using a questionnaire. And so we thought, okay, we did this pilot. We know that people can do it, but we need a little more evidence that's actually going to tell us that we think that if we do a big study, it's going to really show something. And so we said an observational study would be really nice. Let's see if we can find some associations. And so what we did was we looked at a couple of different scales. One that we looked at was a MIND score. The MIND diet is a Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay. And it is all about this Mediterranean pattern, but what you can see here is that there are some kind of things that are a little more specific in terms of things we think can protect from neurodegeneration. So for example, it's not just vegetables. There's a line for other vegetables, but there's a specific line for green leafy vegetables. It's not just a line for fruit, it's actually a line for berries. And so it's actually just a little bit different than other Mediterranean scales, but for the most part, it's actually pretty similar. And so we were able to apply this and also other scales that are very similar to our observational cohorts. So here you can see one of the studies that we did that we published last year, where we looked at how well people's diets aligned with the Mediterranean pattern. And then we looked at their level of MS-related disability, and we measured that by something called the Multiple Sclerosis Functional Composite, which combines 3 different assessments. There's a timed 25-foot walk, and I'm sure people are familiar with doing that in clinic. There's a 9-hole peg test, which times people putting pegs into a dish, so it looks at hand function. And then there's a symbol digit modalities test, or SDMT, which is a measure of cognitive function. And you put those 3 together, and you can see here that there's a very nice association between the Mediterranean diet score and the MSFC. And the really important thing
Our YouTube channel is a great place to start gaining strength, but if you want to get serious about reducing your symptoms and getting results, then you need to be on a weekly structured strength training program with other individuals just like you. And that's exactly what we offer at MS Workouts through our membership. Click the link in the video or below the video to learn how our membership can help you achieve your goals. And while you're on the website, make sure you sign up for the no-cost 7-day strength camp so you can experience how we can help you do the things that you love to do with more confidence. See you all next week.